During my college years, a friend and I worked at our little town's library. The library was modest, located in the middle of town. We did everything from cataloging books to helping guests. However, after 2 years, my friend graduated and departed for work. I continued to work there alone. I was working late one winter evening, a few months before leaving my job. The library stayed open until 10 p.m., although I normally depart around 8 p.m. due to my early classes. That night, however, I was supposed to close with the head librarian. The evening was uneventful, with a continuous stream of guests until around 7 p.m., when things became quiet. At 9:30 p.m., the head librarian received a call requesting a rare book. By 10 p.m., I was leaving the library to deliver the book. The address on the request form was only a 10-minute drive from the library. However, as I drove down the road, I received a call from the head librarian. The caller had provided the incorrect address. I pulled over to write down the correct address. When I entered it into the GPS, I noticed it was not close at all. It was 30 minutes away and in the opposite direction. If we had known this from the beginning, we would have denied the request. I pondered returning to the library, but we had already removed the book from the shelf, and I was already on the road. The town was peaceful at this hour of the night. As I traveled further, the streets grew more empty. I hadn't seen another car in the last 10 minutes of my journey. I had now reached the outskirts of town where the buildings gave way to broad fields and scarce trees. As I went onto the street at the specified location, I noticed a row of old houses, all unlit. Some had porch lights on, but they appeared abandoned. These weren't big residences. They were old, single-story structures that had seen better days. I parked my car in front of the house where I was supposed to deliver it. The silence outside was disturbing, and with no streetlights and nearly no home lights, it was strangely black. As I reached the house, I observed that the door was already open. I looked inside, but no one was there. I could hear unusual sounds coming from inside the home, but I couldn't see anyone. In the distance, I could hear dogs howling, their cries echoing through the dead night. The sound sent shivers down my spine. The scenario seemed increasingly alarming. The open door, the empty house, the unusual noises, and the dogs barking all contributed to the suspense. In my anxiousness, I dropped my car keys right in front of the front door. I bent down to pick them up, but when I straightened up, I noticed 2 shadowy individuals standing behind my car. They bent over as if peeking through the glass. I froze. The figures turned toward me. I couldn't see their features properly, but they appeared to be old. I asked if they needed anything, but they did not reply. I asked again, but they did not move. I looked around, feeling increasingly uneasy. The only thing I could see in the darkness were trees. The individuals then moved away from my car, standing a few steps from the door. I approached my car cautiously, trying to escape as soon as possible. As I reached my car, they continued to stare at me. I quickly opened the door and went inside. But before I could seal the door, the figures began shouting. They were shouting while facing the woods. I followed their eyes and noticed numerous shadows rushing towards my car. Suddenly, a stone smashed my car window. Glass pieces flew everywhere, but I was able to duck in time. My pulse hammered in my chest as I immediately reversed and rushed away, despite the shapes and shadows shouting after me. The journey back to the library was blurry. My mind was spinning, attempting to make sense of what had just occurred. When I finally arrived at the library, I instantly called the police. The police were contacted, but nothing had been found. The house I was supposed to deliver to was unoccupied. The owner resided out of state and had not been there for years. The caller who requested the book was unknown, and the first address they provided did not have much significance. The cops found no indication of the person or shadows I had seen. They offered that it could have been a prank, but I knew what I had seen. I couldn't shake the impression that it was something more evil. Who those people were, what they planned, and many other questions remain unanswered. But I often think about it. If things had gone differently, I might not be here today. That night's memories still haunt me. The shadows in the woods, the figures behind my car, the damaged window, and the eerie silence of the empty house. It serves as a reminder of the unknown, unseen, and mysterious that lurk in the dark. The dropped keys, the open door, the unusual noises all contribute to the puzzle I can't seem to solve, and the barking dogs appeared to know the danger before I did. It's a night that I will never forget. I'm a firefighter and I work the night shift at a bustling city fire station. The city sleeps while we stand guard, ready to face the unexpected. This particular night started off like any other. Routine checks, equipment maintenance, and the calm before the storm. But at 3 a.m., the alarm bell shattered the silence, its shrill cry echoing through the station, a harbinger of the chaos to come. When I went to investigate, I found a frantic dispatcher on the radio, relaying information about a fire at a local warehouse. The dispatcher quickly filled me in. This warehouse was actually a front for an illegal operation that had been busted earlier that night. I'll be honest, my heart sank a little hearing that. You never know what you're going to get working nights in an urban fire station. Fires, accidents, rescues, you name it. Still, it's my job to respond to every call with bravery and determination. I asked the dispatcher for more details, keeping my tone calm and level. She said this warehouse, which appeared to be run by a notorious gang, had caught fire under suspicious circumstances. When the cops tried to investigate, they found the place ablaze and had to call us in. The officers thought the fire might have been started intentionally, so they wanted us to check it out. I assessed the situation from across the room. The warehouse was large and filled with combustible materials. Its structure was solid but old, maybe 50 years old, with a rusty exterior and broken windows. The flames were wild, and the smoke billowed out in thick black clouds. I told the dispatcher I was going to try to extinguish the fire for everyone's safety. As I moved closer to the hose, the heat from the fire intensified. "You're going to pay for this, you hear me?" a voice screamed out of the radio. One of the gang members threatened the cops. I tried not to react outwardly while fighting the flames. The threats, while frightening, were not unusual in this line of work. You need to grow a thick skin. The gang member's voice was intense enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. I'll pay close attention to this scene in the future. Once the fire was under control, I spent the next few hours rotating between my usual duties. I tried to push the unnerving incident from my mind, but every time I passed the charred warehouse, I could feel a sense of dread. An uneasy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Around 6 a.m., I heard that same angry voice again on the radio. I hesitated before responding, steadying my nerves. There he was, shouting threats and profanities at us. "I'll turn your station into a memory. You'll know fear when I return." The verbal attack went on, each threat more chilling than the last. I tried to remain calm and professional as I reported the threats to the dispatcher, but I was visibly shaken. What sort of madness was causing this heightened, disturbing outburst? To my relief, the morning shift arrived to take over. I gave them the rundown, letting them know about the unstable and threatening situation. Their eyes widened as they asked if I'd be pressing charges. I was exhausted. I just wanted to clock out and get away from this nightmare situation. I told them I'd think about it. As I drove home, I kept rehearsing the terrible threats in my thoughts. He made threats with conviction as if he intended to carry them out if given the opportunity. I shivered at the thought. The next days brought more of the same, tension and volatility. Every time I went to work, I hated going near the burned-out warehouse. He was obsessed with revenge and appeared to fantasize about it constantly. My stomach turned as he described the specifics. My supervisor once called me to his office. He stated that numerous firefighters had voiced concern about the threats made against me particularly. They were uncomfortable with the level of extended fury and focus. To minimize accountability, he advised me to avoid from contacting the gang member and delegate any related calls to other personnel. Half of me was relieved, but another half was nervous knowing he was still out there preparing whatever twisted revenge fantasy he had in mind. I hardly slept, and my mind was filled with anxiety. What if he finds out where I live? The situation worsened further. One night at work, a nervous coworker approached me. She trembled as she showed me a crude painting she found in the destroyed warehouse. Flames overrun a hastily rendered fire station. He told me that's what he has planned for you, she said shakily. He wanted me to make sure you got this. I crumpled the terrible drawing in my hands, tears welling up in my eyes. How? Why? What made this man so focused on me? There were no sensible responses, just mute cries repeating in my head. I ended up taking the next couple of weeks off on leave, considering finding a new job for my sanity and safety. When I returned, I asked around about the status of the gang member, bracing for the worst. To my surprise and relief, he was gone. Being arrested and taken into custody was all I could get out of my coworkers. I tried not to dwell too deeply on the twisted thoughts that must have been flitting through his mind during that transition. While working that next shift, I caught myself constantly peering over my shoulder, body tense, anxiously waiting for the other shoe to drop. But nothing came. There were no threats, no drawings, and no signs he'd ever been there at all. As drained as I felt, I tried refocusing on my work and moving forward. Weeks turned into months. Life got back to normal, or as normal as you can expect working nights at a city fire station. I stopped constantly looking over my shoulder, stopped dwelling on him, and stopped the disturbing fixation he developed towards me. Maybe he'd gotten the help he so desperately needed. Maybe he'd moved on to obsessing over something else entirely. Whatever the case, I tried to leave those dark chapters behind me. As a night shift nurse in a city hospital, my nights are a mix of antiseptic smells and the beeping of heart monitors. The strong fluorescent lighting creates long, creepy shadows on the walls. One night in particular was more difficult than others. By 2 a.m., my eyelids were heavy and I moved slowly. I found myself in the hospital cafeteria, where, like me, most people never slept properly. I thought that a cup of lukewarm coffee and a stale sandwich would be enough to get me through the next few hours of my shift. As I sat on the hard plastic chair, sipping the bitter coffee, I couldn't help but think about how my life had changed. Just a few years ago, I was a recent graduate full of excitement and drive. I thought I had everything sorted out, but then the brutal reality of the work kicked in. The long hours, the emotional stress, and the constant struggle between life and death. It all began to weigh on me, causing sleepless nights and an overwhelming feeling of dread. The glaring lights in the cafeteria only added to the dark circles under my eyes, making me question if this was all there was to life. Suddenly, the cafeteria doors flung wide with a loud thud. A woman burst into the cafeteria, her eyes wide and darting around like a cornered animal. Her clothes were untidy, and her once clean nurse's outfit was now wrinkled and soiled. She ran a trembling hand through her untidy hair as she searched the room, clearly confused about where to go next. Her uniform appeared to be coated with dried blood. She stood there, her chest heaving from exertion as if she had been running for a long time. Whatever she was fleeing from must have been nasty, terrible. Without thinking, I got up and made my way over to her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone for you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone level and non-threatening. She jumped a bit, apparently just noticing me there. No, no doctors, she said quickly, panic flaring in her eyes again. I need to get out of here now. Can you help me? Her eyes bored into me, pools of desperation. I hesitated. This woman seemed to be in some serious trouble, and part of me wanted no part of it, but something about her didn't sit right with me. There was a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that I couldn't shake off. But before my brain could catch up, my mouth was agreeing. Yeah, I can do that. My car's in the parking lot. With a curt nod, the woman headed for the door, throwing it open and striding out into the night. I followed, mentally preparing myself for whatever I was getting into with this woman. She was waiting by the curb as I pulled my car around, practically yanking the back door open and jumping into the back seat before the car even stopped moving. Just drive, she growled, not meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. So I drove. The first few miles passed in tense silence. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires as we left the city, heading north. I kept glancing up to study this mystery passenger, but she just stared resolutely ahead, her jaw clenched tight. Her hands were balled into white-knuckled fists in her lap, and I could see them trembling slightly. Whatever had her running was still fresh, still haunting her. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke up from the back seat. Pull off at the next exit. I did as she asked, guiding the car off the highway and onto a deserted road cutting through the pitch-black countryside. We drove a few more miles before she had me turn down an old dirt road. The car's high beams barely made a dent in the darkness, swallowing the path ahead. This is good. Stop here, she said, her voice emotionless. I brought the car to a halt and turned in my seat to face her. All right, we're stopped. Where to now? Instead of answering, she suddenly lunged forward, hitting me hard on the head. The world spun and I blacked out. When I came to, I was alone. The back door of the car was still open, swinging gently in the breeze. I got out of the car, my head throbbing, and looked around. There was no sign of the woman. She had disappeared into the forest, leaving no trace behind. I called the cops when I got back to the city, but they didn't find anything. There was no trace of the woman and no sign of any crime. Just an empty stretch of road, the dark, silent forest, and the lingering question of who she was and why she had hit me. Even now, whenever I get too tired on the night shift and my mind starts to wander, I'll find myself wondering who that woman was and what happened to her. Part of me doesn't want to know, but another part, that dark, morbidly curious part we all have buried deep down, wants to uncover the mystery.